When the remake of the classic, genre-defining first-person shooter Doom arrived on the scene back in 2016, gamers were blown away at the work developers id Software had done with it, bringing a fan-favorite shooter into the current generation by adding high-speed combat arenas and introducing highly engaging gameplay systems such as glory kills, while keeping the game rooted in its origins and what made it so popular in the past by delivering fast-paced gameplay with no reloads and just using your tools to kill demons.
We must pray now.
So it was no surprise that ever since its announcement, fans have been eager to get their hands on its sequel, Doom Eternal. With the promise of more action than ever, Doom Eternal has had fans of the series shuddering with anticipation to get back into the fight as the Doomslayer and kill as many demons as is humanly possible.
For his armies, as they fear the mark of the beast.
Now that the game is available, and we have had ample time with the single-player campaign, the question now has to be asked. Does Doom Eternal live up to the hype set by its predecessor, or should it be sent back to the depths of hell itself? In a very similar fashion to its 2016 counterpart, Doom Eternal starts off with the pedal to the floor and does not let up throughout the entire campaign, which is one thing I loved about the first one. But one of the first things that jumped out to me that was different this time around was that it added a fair amount of more story elements to the game. This time, the Doomslayer is tasked with stopping a large-scale invasion of Earth from the many, many demons pouring out of hell portals popping up all around the globe, which usually tends to be the main story beat in games like these. But this time around, the developers also dug a bit deeper into the Doomslayer himself, telling a tale throughout the game about his origins and why he seems to be so angry all the time. Showcasing his conflict with the main antagonists of the game really give the Doomslayer, and in turn the player, a bit of motivation throughout this blood-riddled campaign, even giving a few nods to previous entries in the series. But while the game's story is intriguing and kept me drawn in, I will say that near the latter part of the game, especially in the final levels, and even the final boss fight, it felt a little underwhelming to me, as the build-up to this final showdown did not feel as epic to me as the ending to Doom 2016. While I expected some cool narrative twists, based on what was shown prior, the ending really had a similar feel to some of the story and combat that had led me to that point, and that I had been experiencing throughout the entire campaign, culminating into a somewhat lackluster final fight that really didn't feel as grand as some of the other battles before it. I won't spoil anything for you here, but even though the story additions felt somewhat small compared to other game titles, I did like the slight change of pace and learning a bit more about what makes our titular hero so hell-bent on killing every demonic figure within sight. Adding even more to the story elements for the game is the presentation. id Tech 7, the latest iteration of id Software's in-house graphic engine, is on full display throughout the entire game. From the crumbling bricks, buildings, and infrastructure on Earth, to the writhing flesh pits of hell, and even to the furthest asteroids around Mars, the graphics on display here are a tour de force and a gold standard for future games from the developer to follow, and in some ways sets a high bar for future Bethesda Software games as well. Everything from the dirt and debris brushing off structures and other parts of the environment, to the blood dripping from your super shotgun and gushing from enemies during brutal kill sequences. The latest engine from id is holding nothing back, and it truly helps to immerse you in the world that it is building. While some areas did seem to begin to look similar as I progressed through the campaign, there was more than enough variety and change throughout to keep myself entranced while walking through each set piece to my next objective. Another aspect of the presentation is audio, and the sights and sounds of Hell's minions pouring out to take on the Doomslayer are as excellent as ever. From the ripping of your bullets and blades through your enemies, to the tearing of flesh and bone, audio team at id has done a wonderful job bringing back some of the best sounds from Doom 2016, while also introducing new elements and even adding some nods to classic Doom games into the mix. But what really is the icing on the cake here, as with the 2016 title, is the soundtrack, which, thankfully, brings composer Mick Gordon back into the fray for the sequel. Annihilating demons is one thing, but the heavy metal and synth melodies from the soundtrack help to elevate the presentation and gameplay to another level. I must tell you, nothing felt better than jumping into a nest of demons and getting amped up by the warped riff and emphatic bass and guitar strings from the music. I would honestly say that it even helped push me forward in a pinch, giving me that extra motivation needed to conquer a tough foe and emerge victorious, which is tremendous when a soundtrack to a game adds that much for players. Story and presentation are all good and well, but what about the gameplay, right? Well, I'm excited to say that everything that made Doom 2016 great to play, the arena combat, glory kills, and fast-paced fighting are safe and intact here in Doom Eternal. Going further than that, the developers at id even took it one step further, with the fights and battles feeling even more frenetic and intense than ever before. Combat chess, a term used to describe back and forth battles from Doom 2016, are back and cranked all the way to 11 here. Your ammo stockpiles for your weapons, from the shotgun to the plasma rifle to even new guns such as the arbalist, are a little more restrictive now than in the previous entry, forcing you to utilize your full arsenal of weaponry and demon-slaying instruments to plan ahead during fights to make sure you walk away, generally, unscathed. There is more leverage to use the chainsaw to grab up more ammo when you are running low, which will become a necessity when rolling through your weapon wheel, and especially when using some of the new attachments for weapons to help you dispense your demonic foes more quickly. New attachments like the sticky bomb connection for the shotgun can be used to stagger some enemies instantly, giving you a window of opportunity to grab that precious glory kill if you are running low on health. Couple this with the fast switching you can do with your attachments and weapons, along with a new layout for your codex, which is a good reference point to see what certain enemies are weak against, and you can slowly start getting into the rhythm of taking enemies down quickly, which, in later levels, will be an absolute necessity, as enemies further down the line will become tougher, more varied, and more numerous in combat arenas. Even with the addition of some platforming elements that help to slow down the pace of the game a bit, and add more puzzles and variety, they help cool you down just long enough before jumping back into the fray into another large-scale arena battle. You will soon discover that every shot will matter, especially when taking on some of the more difficult and challenging foes that appear halfway through the game. But, while I loved flying off of poles and ledges to deliver the Doomslayer's brand of justice, one thing that I was not too pleased about with the combat were the systems that have been added this time around, which is a lot. I mentioned earlier about utilizing the chainsaw to help with ammo pickups this time around, and that is not an exaggeration. In Doom Eternal, players now have to keep an eye on ammo reserves and use the chainsaw when they can grab ammo, while also making sure to keep your health up and run through a glory kill to get more if needed, while also utilizing some of the new weapons in the game, like the Flame Belch, which applies some fire damage onto enemies and forces them to drop armor pieces instead of health. All this while running around the arena keeping track of what type of enemies are on the field, what they're capable of, and what the best weapon is to take them down. This may not sound like a lot at first, but when adding in the numerous back-end systems added to help make the Doomslayer even more of a badass, each of the 8 weapons having 2 different attachments that can affect different enemies in different ways, the weapon points you can use to upgrade the abilities on those attachments, the mastery perks on attachments once you upgrade all of the weapons to its maximum, your Flame Belt shoulder cannon for collecting armor, frag grenades, and ice grenades as situational support items, Praetor coin collectibles used to upgrade and add beneficial perks to some of your abilities and armaments on the Praetor suit, Sentinel crystals, which you can collect through the game at certain points to upgrade either health, ammo, or armor one tick at a time, while also getting more bonuses to abilities when paired properly, and runes, which allow the player to set up to 3 active bonuses to give the Doomslayer even more abilities. It really made me feel overwhelmed, especially in the larger part of the first half of the game. As I played more and more, this became a big sticking point for me, and it really made me feel as though it could be a somewhat big barrier of entry for new players into the franchise. I will admit, by the time I rolled credits on the campaign, I had an extremely great grasp of all the combat necessities and could mow down Neiman hordes exactly as the Slayer should. But I am concerned about new players who may be picking this up for the first time, who may get overwhelmed at what it felt like to me at least, all of the controls, features, and functions available to them during the first part of the game, and may opt out entirely after frustration through the fights. This is a shame as well, as I believe once you do get over that hump of understanding the systems that it has laid out, the fight arenas and combat in Doom Eternal are some of the best that gaming has to offer this generation. All in all, I enjoyed every bit of the 15 plus hours I spent with Doom Eternal in its campaign. The story was a nice distraction, but never truly felt like a driving force in the game. The presentation was breathtaking from every venue and vista I was able to witness while hopping between Earth, Mars, Hell, and everything in between. The music and audio, once again, continue to be a standout in this series. The combat, which is phenomenal and as frenetic as ever, is very rewarding, but only after learning, understanding, and applying in practice a ton of new systems and features, making it feel like a somewhat large learning curve at the start of the game. id really has nailed it once again in their reimagining of this classic franchise. While I did have some issues with this specific iteration, and in some instances preferred the first go-around with Doom 2016, I still feel like this is one of the highlights of 2020 so far, and should be a great pickup for gamers who have played the 2016 counterpart and are ready to rip and tear through Hell's armies once again. If you like this video, please make sure to follow us on YouTube and head over to rocketpunchgo.com for more content that we make for you each and every day. And as always, be sure to follow Rocket Punch, your southern source for all things gaming, geek, and more.